I'm Rick Polito. I'm editor-in-chief of the Nutrition Business Journal. I'm here with Risa Schulman from Taproot and Akash Shah from Ingredients AI. We're here to talk about science, but not the science anybody wants to talk about. So that's not interesting. We're talking about something that a lot of people out here don't want to talk about. And that's this sort of what the Wall Street Journal calls a flood of fraudulent studies. I mean, this has made the jump out into the mainstream of places like the Wall Street Journal to talk about fraudulent studies up and down different journals, people retracting stuff, and a whole kind of a new era of ways of getting the fake studies, disseminating them, finding them, connecting them with people, and it's bigger than you think. So I'm going to start this conversation with Risa. Risa is a regulatory expert and I'd call her a science nerd, but she's close in on the science and reads studies every day. And a lot of this came as a surprise to her. So as I said, this has made it into the mainstream a little bit, but I'm not hearing a lot of conversations in the industry. It's, how big is this? So I'm going to start that with you. We got aisles and aisles of here. If I went out there, would I find a company that's relying on a study like this that has been retracted or is due to be retracted?
It's quite possible. Can you all hear me? Can't hear me. The lavalier on? Yeah? Hello? Okay. So it's quite possible that you find somewhere in the aisles here more than one. I don't want to start saying probabilities or whatnot, but I will give you a perspective. And that perspective is that in the last 2 years, there were more than 11,000 papers that were retracted. And that is in comparison to, for example, in the year 2000, there were 40. Or even in the year 2013, there were about 1,000. So there's definitely been a flood in the last 15 or so years. Thank you. There's been a flood in the last 15 or so years. This has been not only due to individual actors, but also to something called paper mills, which are organizations or businesses really in various countries who have a pay-to-play. You can pay as little as $2,000 and get a study put together for you that's completely fraudulent, that never happened, that has your name on it as first author and is published in a prominent journal. So this is something we haven't seen before, but it's gaining momentum. And I also want to give you the perspective that the retractions are happening. A very low percentage of these studies are being actually retracted. The publications are not so forthcoming about doing those retractions. So this is really a tip of the iceberg kind of situation here. And I can just keep talking. Do you want me to just keep, you want to focus me to another question?
Let's keep talking. Let's talk about sort of the awareness in the industry of this. You started to look at, like I said, your front lines on evaluating studies as they come through. What can be said here? What claims can you match? Where are the good studies? And sort of evaluating just the quality of the model, of how it's been set up. But this whole thing of being, these weren't real even in the first place, much less a thinly sourced study or a poorly designed study. How much do you think the awareness is out there?
Right. So I've been speaking with people. I've been rabble-rousing. This came up for me because I was looking at a study. I was actually proofreading a document, and I went back into PubMed to check my citation, and I saw the word retracted at the top above the title, and I was like, what is this? And I tried to find more information, couldn't even find more information, but clearly couldn't use the study anymore. Fortunately, the claims that were based on that study were kind of secondary, and it was very easy to modify the marketing message without disrupting things too much. But then it happened again. And I said, what's going on here? And I started having to look into it. It turns out that this is something that's been talked about for quite some time, but I didn't know about it. I learned about it from this practical information. I started doing some digging. So we actually have people within our industry who've been tracking this and reporting on it. So Eric Goldman is one of the people who wrote a very in-depth article in his Holistic Primary Care News, which I recommend, sort of like the anatomy of a fraudulent study, the how and the why. And also we have Dr. Alan Gaby, who's been in the industry for many, many years. He's an ND. He is he wrote the textbook on nutritional medicine. He's read, by his own estimation, 50,000 articles over the years, and he was the one who started noticing inconsistencies, and he's published on this as well. So I started to get aware that this was happening, and as I was talking to people, I found that it's becoming really a tsunami kind of an issue, and particularly once it got picked up by the Wall Street Journal. So it's something I think that all companies need to take a look at, both from a going forward perspective, at the very least, putting in checks and balances about literature that's being reviewed, that's being used to make claims or as a platform for a condition-specific area or a target audience, and then looking backwards. And it's a little bit of a scary thing to have to do, but I think it's very necessary. FTC has, renewed its, call to us to say we're watching, number one. Number two, I think that eventually sellers are going to start to ask a question, get questions asked of them for, are these studies real? How can you reassure me that these studies are real?
Okay, let's come back to that. I wanted to stick on this idea of anybody talking about it. Now, Akash, his company is helping brands go out there and find what science does and claims. He's using AI to sort of scope all the published literature. But now you've got this new wrinkle that's coming in here with not as much of that literature is bona fide as we thought it was. Where do you think, are you hearing from any of your clients as they come into this, like, AI is going to find this for me? Are they asking that question yet? Should they be?
Definitely. I mean, I think not just because of the Wall Street Journal, but I think fraudulent research has been around for a very, very long time. And as a community, we're starting to detect that at higher levels than we did before. And tools like ChatGPT can be used to actually make these paper mills even more efficient. So there's concerns that there's going to be more fraudulent research growing at a rate that's faster than ever before. But I think
you're hearing this from your clients now.
I wouldn't say everyone, but I've definitely heard it from the more sophisticated ones who really care about making sure that they're separating good science from bad science when they're looking to substantiate a claim and build a product that's safe for their consumers. But I think the most insightful thing that I've heard that we also believe is that it is humanly impossible to be able to review every single piece of evidence that's out there and to identify whether it's fraudulent or identify whether it should be retracted. And so in many ways, the question that's being asked, and it's already being answered, is how can we actually use AI to better detect the research that's fraudulent or the research that's maybe even been produced by AI. We've had technology around for a very long time that can help detect plagiarism, for example. It can help detect images that have been modified. So it's actually not a too foreign concept for us as a scientific community to say, why can't we use technology to also identify papers that have a higher risk of being fraudulent? So I think that's where the puck is going to go, if I had to guess.
Yeah, well, we'll come back to the pieces of that, but there is that awareness from, like you said, your more sophisticated customers. But a lot of people are still, go find me some science, and they're not looking.
PubMed only added their retracted filter to their database like less than 2 years ago. So that hasn't even been a filter that existed on PubMed until very, very recently. And
Wow.
so the awareness is just, to your point, Risa, it's just starting to expand. I definitely predict that I'm going to get more of those kinds of questions as this becomes more and more aware.
Let's go back a little bit, Risa. I remember, God, it has to be 8 years ago, you came up with an idea, the PubMed punch-up, where people just looked in there at any study and added them up. Is there a problem in the relationship this industry has with science sometimes, do you think?
That's a great question. I have to say that since I wrote that article, where this is when PubMed, this is even more than 8 years ago, I think, when PubMed was everyone's newest best friend, they would say, oh, I put XYZ ingredient into PubMed and there were 2,500 articles, so look how well researched it is. That's not how it works. And my article kind of went into the how and the wherefores of that. But
I remember we looked it up and we put up the statistics of how many times Bigfoot had been studied in PubMed too.
Right.
The Loch Ness Monster, Poltergeist, we had it all in there.
Right.
But go back to, you were saying, so that's, the relationship with science has always been problematic in some
Well,
ways.
yes, but I think we've come quite a long way since those days. I think that many companies are much more responsible, and they have people on staff who are PhDs, who know how to evaluate science critically, to use it properly. And I think that teams they're trying to be on the right side of the fence. You have multidisciplinary teams of marketing and legal and PR and science and scientific affairs, and they're trying to do the right thing. I do see that quite a bit, and I really want to laud the industry for that, because we really have come a long way. And then, we always talk about, the bad actors, et cetera, and even some people who are just perhaps out of ignorance don't understand what it takes to critically evaluate a study. I myself, call myself naive, but I did not ever assume that a study was fraudulent. If I saw something that was a little bit, didn't quite add up, as wow, that's a really good result. And it didn't occur to me that it was fabricated. I'm just not that kind of person. Maybe other people are a little bit less naive or a little bit more, kind of critical in that way. But certainly now I am, and this is part of the reason why I'm so happy that you gave us this platform, is to bring people's awareness up. For that reason, because I do think that, everyone that I have spoken to, and I've been rabble-rousing and talking to a lot of people in a lot of different, in the trades and in companies and whatnot, everyone that I have spoken to has said, this is scary, which it is scary, but it also says to me that people are taking it seriously. Mm-hmm. And so, to answer your question, I do think that the relationship with science has come a long way, and hopefully, will continue to be taken as seriously as it should be.
But this is a whole new level of something. It isn't like criticizing a study because it's 3 fruit flies and 2 mice. This is like completely pulled out of
those days are over.
Yeah, but
That's
it's not the quality
be,
of the study, it's the very existence of the evidence.
It's the existence of the evidence. And one thing that I want to point out, there are a couple of resources that I think that for companies that want to start looking into this. I think there's an internal, inside each company dialogue that has to happen, and then there's a community dialogue that has to happen around this. So for those that are going to be starting these dialogues inside companies, some of the resources that you can use, there's an excellent website called Retraction Watch, which has been out already for almost 15 years. It's 2 volunteers, but they publish on a weekly basis studies that have been retracted, particular bad actors who have things like over 200 retracted studies, et cetera, things like this. That's a resource if you're going to run by. It would be at my first pass. If you have a set of studies, go there first and see if it's in their database. There are things that Akash can talk more about. There's something called the Problematic Paper Mill, Problematic Paper Alarm. I think there's the Paper Mill something. STM Integrity Hub is a website that you can go to, and I think more of these tools are going to be coming out because we're not the only industry that's dealing with this. This is across every industry, and people are thinking about this, and there's a lot of learnings that can be gathered from around the world of how people are making their own checklists, for example. Dr. Alan Gaby has a checklist. It's also in Eric's article of here are some ways of determining whether a paper is suspect or not. You can't always be sure, but there are some things that are kind of, impossibilities. And when you find something that's an impossibility in the study, right away, you shouldn't use this study.
Okay, do you think it's are there certain kind of categories in this industry that are more vulnerable as to others, or is this all across the board? Like you've already said that other industries are facing the same thing, but is there certain places where you're more suspicious? Is it sports nutrition? Is it what?
Not that I know of, and I'm into this because I just seized on it. I can't not do something about this. It's too important to me, but I don't know everything that there is to know, and it's the tip of the iceberg. But my sense is that it's probably, unless there's just a specific piece of the story that ends up having one particular category be more vulnerable to this, it's probably across the board. The root of this is that researchers need to, there's the publisher perish, which has only gotten worse and more of a stress on researchers. And so that paired together with open access journals that will publish for a fee, it makes it ripe for unethical behavior, people to just get that study out there, just pay for it, and everyone in that circle wins. The publication wins, and the researcher wins, and that's what happens. I want to make another caution that open access journals are particularly vulnerable. If you talk, it may not be condition-specific areas, but if you're trying to figure out where you might have to have your antenna up a little more, open access journals, I don't want to trash them across the board, absolutely not. But just because of the model the way it is, they're vulnerable. And there's actually a list that I was made aware of called Beall's List, B-E-A-L-L. Beall's List is a librarian, actually, who is keeping a list of open access journals that were bogus, who said they had peer review, but they either had nothing of the sort or they had very lax peer review, and it was sort of known that anything that's published in there is probably not real. He has since retired, and it has not been updated. I think the last time was like 2 to 3 years ago, but it's still a very valuable archived resource of lists of open access journals to stay away from.
Okay, want to go to Akash. Tell me, you said that some companies are asking the questions more. Is that a difference in size? Where's the sophistication coming at from you? Or what is it? Is it just the personalities behind it?
I think that ultimately, I don't know if folks in our industry necessarily see this as a different problem, the way that you framed it, from quality of studies. I think ultimately, the best companies in this industry are always evaluating whether the science is good or whether the science is bad. And fraudulent is basically the worst version of it. But ultimately, there's a whole spectrum of science in the middle as well that maybe isn't fraudulent, maybe wasn't produced by a paper mill, but it's still pretty bad science. And I think that most companies that we partner with that are here at this show are constantly trying to assess the difference between what's good and bad, and they have heuristics that are objective that they use to be able to figure that out.
But the sophistication to know about this whole fraudulent, flood, as the Wall Street
I
Journal
wouldn't say
said.
I've noticed a pattern there, Rick.
Okay.
It's still just the identification of the research that's being produced by ChatGPT or by paper mill is still something that I've probably only heard from a few people. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
It's
do you
more
think-
just like, is this good science, basically?
Well, Risa, do you see a pattern in that too of like companies? Is it size? Is it just approach? The people who are starting to talk about this are noticing this?
I agree with Akash. It's so new. Most people don't even know about this. They don't even know that they have to be looking for this. So time will tell.
I do believe, though, not to be overly optimistic on this extremely serious topic, but I have a bit of a different perspective on the future of this topic, which is that I think the irony of the concern of fraudulent research because of generative AI is that actually we now as a society have a technology available to us that can scan millions of papers and help us detect fraudulent research a lot faster than we have before. I think we've had some of these resources that you mentioned, but ultimately the resources are only going to be as good as those here that actually utilize those resources. And to utilize those resources when you're reviewing paper after paper after paper after paper, it adds a lot of effort to the process, and I just don't know how well utilized those resources will be. But I'm optimistic that with generative AI, we will have tools very soon. I don't know exactly when, but probably in the next 6 to 12 months. In fact, we're working on our own version of it at Ingredient AI, where you can better flag something that should potentially be retracted or might be fraudulent. So I think the future's actually, the problem's getting worse, but there's actually a real solution that's coming, in my opinion.
Well, but it starts to sound like AI versus AI. We got AI writing them over here and AI over there detecting them. It's sort of like the war of the robots. How does this end? Isn't this how Terminator started?
I can't predict the future, Rick.
But is there an arms race thing going on there? And
I wouldn't think of it as an arms race. I would just think of it as an irony of a technology that can actually solve its own problem.
well, Risa, do you have any faith in this? I'm a newspaper reporter and a complete cynic from birth.
I know you are.
I have no faith in that.
I know.
I think it's like any technology. You could pick nuclear power. It can be used for great good and it can be used for great evil.
Exactly.
It's the same thing here, and we just have to try and be on the right side. I mean, we obviously want to be on the right side of this one. Use it. I mean, I don't have a problem with using AI to detect bad AI. Why not? Use it in our favor. And I just want to say also that it goes beyond. It's not just an AI solvable issue. It's going to be also a community solved
Totally.
issue and a globally solved issue. Honestly, I mean, I envision for this industry, I envision working groups. Why should every company have to reinvent the wheel for themselves? We should have our trade groups involved, and they are getting involved. The CRN's involved, ABC's involved in best practices for our industry. Why shouldn't we put out infographics about, here's the 10 top ways to screen for a fraudulent study? Why shouldn't we do that? Why shouldn't we borrow from other industries who've already put in their work? And then the next level also, obviously it's a global problem. Perhaps there will be certifications of some kind. Perhaps there will be a demand on publications, right? Because that's one of the roots. The publications, they're doing the publishing of these studies. Should they be held to higher count? Should the peer review process, a lot of people talk about how the peer review process is broken, it's not broken, etc. That's a critical piece of this also. It's a lot of moving parts that can come together to help fix this problem.
I completely agree. I completely agree. The responsibility is on us as a scientific community. My only point was that we can use technology as a tool to be able to improve scientific rigor, which has been a problem since the beginning of science, but I think we can use technology to improve it.
But do you think that, like I said, on the other side of this technology, we're not going to call it arms race, we'll call it a conflict. Is that going to accelerate the problem, at least for a while, that I could write a study faster than my fake study guy I hired could?
I don't know, to be honest with you, but I don't think so. Because if anything, it's just making the problem more in focus for us as a community. It's causing us to pay more attention to this problem. And my hope is that as a result, our rigor will improve and actually science will benefit from this technology.
Okay, well, Risa, let's go back to some of the risks of it, like the bad part that happens. Not that just you have to be responsible and go through and find these, or you have to make some statement. FTC, changed their rules around substantiation, 2 years ago, 3 years ago.
Set alert.
Yep.
How much do they know about this going on?
I don't know. That's a good question. I would imagine, it became front page news this past spring.
Right.
So I imagine they're aware of it. I don't know what they're doing about it or how they're incorporating it into their ways of thinking, into their reviews, etc. But it's only going to become more prominent. That it doesn't seem to me like something that's going to be a flash in the pan and it's going to go away. It's too important. There are too many people involved. There are too many people doing things about it.
But it's a new vulnerability if you're having a conversation with FTC.
I would think so. Yeah, I would think so. You have to be buttoned up. There's another place to be buttoned up, so to speak.
Okay. Well, what kind of conversations are you having with your clients now?
It depends on the client. Some of them are looking back at the research that they have. Let's make sure we know about these papers. Let's make sure we're buttoned up about these. Some of them are saying, okay, so are you doing this extra level of scrutiny? Are you doing it for us? Are we doing it? How are we dealing with this? We have Mark Blumenthal here from ABC. He's taken a look at his Herbalogram, HerbClip, and saying, okay, we have to own this. We have to be responsible. We put out research. We tell the community that this is good research. We're going to be labeling, and he's going through this, and he can talk with you about it. Labeling papers that have been retracted and talking about how do we do this. It's a community issue as well of how we're going to go about this. And my fervent hope is that this session, and we also have a lot of publication in it, Eric's publication. I just wrote something recently in NBJ, which is available online at the Supply Side Supplement Journal website. Start conversations, please, in your companies, because it's going to have to be a community effort. And it goes concentric circles out. Your company, our trades, your B2B communications, your B2C communications, and then Also, our responsibility as an industry. This could be used as fodder against us, another piece of information. Oh, look at the dietary supplement, there was a retracted article and they based this on it. And more fodder for the naysayers. We don't want that. We want as a community for us to say, yes, we're aware of this. This is a global problem. It's not just our problem. And this is how we're dealing with it because scientific integrity is important to us. I would love that to be where we're standing when some reporter picks up on this with regard to something within our industry. So please, no one has time. Mark said this, we don't have time, we don't have money, and they're doing it anyways to their great credit. And we have to do it as well because ultimately it can really come back to bite us if we don't.
Are you satisfied with what you're seeing right now in terms of, like, this is happening quickly? Is the industry responding quickly enough?
We're very early, just like Akash said, we're very early. I'm very pleased that ABC's efforts, CRN is very involved and interested. Everyone that I've spoken to has said, wow, we have to do something about this, right? And there has to be a hub, and we're early in the evolution. And again, I appeal to you, are we gonna have working groups? Maybe at the next Supply Site East, maybe at the MBJ Summit. I don't know, we should really share resources here because nobody has time for this. And we have to make time for this. So why shouldn't we all make it as efficient as possible and help each other out?
Well, Akash, what do you think? Do you think that, like you said, this is so new, you're just starting to hear about it from a few clients. Where do you see this in 3-4 months? What would you like to see happen in 3 or 4 months?
I would, like I said earlier, I would like to see the tools that people are currently using today to locate scientific evidence. I would like to see those tools incorporate these checks into their software so that we almost don't have to add that to our SOP of how we review science. That's what I would like to see. I would like to see flags. I'd like to see a score, a temperature on how strong is this science, how likely is it to be fraudulent, how likely is it to have been generated by a paper mill. And then I'd like to have those tools then automatically say, hey, you should maybe ignore this study, or you should double check that this is a real study. I think the only way that this actually becomes preventable is if it's built and embedded into the tools that we're using.
And if that tool was available, could a company take that and just unleash it on whatever was in their library and their sort of quiver of studies they've used?
Exactly. Like if I had, something that Mark and I are talking about this too with the herb clips, if we can find a way to use technology to identify which of these studies have already been marked as retracted on PubMed, which is very possible, then you should be able to very quickly mark those studies as retracted rather than having to go one by one.
I just want to make everyone aware that there's another designation, not just retracted. There's another one called an expression of concern, and it comes out as a letter. And this is issued by a publication if there has been something questionable about a study and the authors do not address those issues satisfactorily. And then the journal will then put out this thing called expression of concern. There are a lot of those out there, and you can look them up. And you can look up, there are certain authors that have almost all of their papers are now have expressions of concern from across journals, and some of these are very reputable journals. So I just wanted to put that out there to educate you along those lines. Maybe we have time for some questions?
We could take a question, but you'd have to, here's Eric. Do you want to come up and grab this mic? We'll share.
Hi folks, Eric Goldman with Holistic Primary Care. So my question is to Akash, since you seem to be really on the edge of the AI. Is there a possibility to build AI tools into the journal's peer review process? Because it seems like that's where the major breakdown is happening. People just don't have time to analyze these journal papers when they're submitted. It's just way easier to sign off of them, get them published, and if they're retracted 10 years down the road, who cares? You know what I mean? So we need the tools at the starting point upstream.
Exactly. I completely agree. You articulated it better than I could. I think in that peer review process,
Lisa,
the tool should be embedded into that process. So it actually, as a result, makes our entire peer review process better, which then enhances scientific rigor. It's not happening as quickly as I'd like it to, but it's going to happen. It's just a matter of time. That's my view.
okay. Well, we'll
Time for one more?
We'll do one more question, and then I'll let Risa wrap it up here.
Hi, thank you very much. When you talk about the anatomy of a fraudulent study, are you talking mainly about the drafting and AI and so forth, or also, for example, about the study design and sort of the content of the study?
I'm sorry, I had a little trouble hearing you.
For fraudulent studies, do you also consider the study design, in other words, how the study was set up, or is it just about how it was drafted and paper mill and so forth?
Yeah, there's a number of factors, and it can extend to any portion of the study itself. An example of a study design that would be unlikely would be, for example, a very large study population for a very like one researcher publishing it, right? So they have a very large study. There's only one person who worked on that study. It's a little bit implausible. Or, for example, also a very large study population for an indication that has no prior work on it. There's no pilot studies, there's no animal work. Why would they go straight into a 200-person study? That's not the way it's done. Other things like you have a timeline for a study. Let's say you have recruitment and you're going to recruit 100 people, and then you're going to give an intervention for 12 weeks and a four-week follow-up, so that you can kind of figure out how long that study should take. Started recruiting March 2023, and then you look at the paper. There's always in the little font when the paper was submitted and when it was accepted. If the paper was submitted and accepted in August of 2023, it's a little too early. Not possible to finish that study properly, to recruit all those people and get through 3 months of treatment, analyze the data, publish it, peer review it. Not possible. It happens. I mean, we've seen things like that, and I didn't make this up. I'm a newbie to this field. There have been people who've been doing this for way longer than I and know what they're talking about, and they've published these kinds of lists of things to look for in study design. These little nuances. I never looked at such things. I wasn't thinking of such things. We have to look at them.
And that's our new reality. We have to wrap up now. We were out of time a few seconds ago. I want to thank Risa for bringing this to my attention and bringing it to all our attention. The piece that was in the Nutrition Business Journal also published online in Supply Side Supplement Journal. So look for it there to read her piece there, and keep following this. This is a big deal. It doesn't get solved until everybody's here together, working with people like Akash and Risa and the trades and Mark Blumenthal and Eric. We got to get on top of this, because we've seen lesser things explode big in the public consciousness. So thank you all for coming. Thank you again, Risa. Thanks, Akash.
Thank you, Rick. Yeah.
Pleasure. Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Thank you.